Well, talk is cheap. It's easy to say, oh, yes, I want a wealth tax. It's a form of appeal to authority where he would just say, well, I've bet money on my predictions. I'm rich, therefore I'm always right. And what do you know? You're an egghead economist. You've got your Econ 101 textbook, whereas I've got millions in my bank account. Being pro-wealth tax is not a class struggle message. It's not about confronting the billionaires and the multimillionaires.
Hello and welcome to the Institute of Economic Affairs podcast. I'm Callum Price, Director of Communications, and today I'm joined by our editorial director, Kristian Niemietz. Now, before we dive in, remember to subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to ensure that you don't miss a single episode or interesting interview that we do, and also on Substack at insider.iea.org.uk to get all of our content straight to your inbox. Now, Kristian, you've written for said Substack on the group Patriotic Millionaires. You've asked the question, even the super rich themselves want a wealth tax, so why don't the evil neoliberals? The evil is my own editorialising there. First of all, can you talk to us about what in the world the Patriotic Millionaires actually are?
Yes, so Patriotic Millionaires is a campaign group of millionaires who want a wealth tax. And they've been doing this for a couple of years. They have, their message seems slightly counterintuitive. You have other wealth tax campaigners, so Zach Polanski in particular, who present their wealth tax campaigning as a campaign against the billionaires. They present this as he presents his ideas in confrontational terms. He thinks that modern politics is basically a struggle between ordinary people on the one hand and the billionaires and the multimillionaires on the other hand. And he likes to think that the billionaires and the multimillionaires are rattled by his radicalism and they fear him and they're on the run. And the Patriotic Millionaires, even though they broadly want the same thing, well, both of them are campaigning for a wealth tax, they present their goals in a different way. Their emphasis is very much on, survey evidence in part, which they have commissioned, but also from YouGov, where they just show, actually most millionaires, most rich people in this country are also in favor of a wealth tax. So this is true that when you ask the public, there have been a couple of surveys on wealth taxes over the past couple of years where you just ask a randomly selected group of people, are you in favor of a wealth tax? And you give them some information about what that means. Say this would be the rate, this would be the threshold. Always turns out the vast majority of people are in favor of it. And that's not hugely surprising because most people think this is a tax that somebody else has to pay and I'll get free money. Great. But actually, what the data shows is that even the people who are likely to pay that wealth tax, they give broadly the same answer. So maybe a few percentage points less, but broadly speaking, pretty much across the board, whether you ask people who identify as left-wing or right-wing or centrist, whether you look at different age groups or income groups, doesn't really matter. Everyone seems to be in favor of a wealth tax. And according to Patriotic Millionaires, and this is the part that they always emphasize, even among the super rich, even the people who would pay this tax, who know that they would be in financial terms worse off if we had a wealth tax, they still want it. And because they think, that's at least their interpretation, they support that tax because they know this would make them financially a bit worse off, but they would benefit in other ways. They would benefit from living in a better functioning society with functioning public services, and they are prepared to pay their share of that, and that's why they support it. So that is their message, that this is actually not being pro-wealth tax is not a class struggle message. It's not about confronting the billionaires and the multimillionaires, and in a Polanski way, it's not about making sure that they're as rattled as possible, but this is something that which they themselves consent to. And the reason why they emphasize is that they say, well, for that reason, there cannot be any negative behavioural effects. So the things that we, not just as free marketers, but I guess any mainstream economist would be warning about, that this leads to capital flight and other negative responses, they would say, well, no, we can't do that because the millionaires, they love it. They want to be taxed. They're asking for it.
Is it not just virtue signalling on their part?
That's a possibility. I can't read these people's minds. I don't want to say that it definitely is. It is a bit, of course, it's, talk is cheap. It's easy to say, oh, yes, I want a wealth tax, because whether you say that or not, it's not as if that had any influence on the likelihood of a wealth tax actually happening. So you could, if you think it won't happen, there's no cost in saying, yes, I want a wealth tax. If you think it will happen, well, then you can also say it, because then it's going to happen anyway. So either way, you're better off just saying the thing that's socially desirable, and that quite clearly right now is to say you support a wealth tax. Social desirability bias would push you in that direction. That's the answer that you're socially expected to give, and therefore it's a cheap thing to say. But what I've tried to do in my article is to actually be as generous to them as I can, even perhaps more than is really justifiable. And projecting maybe the most noble motives into them, even if I'm not fully convinced that those really are their motives. But I want to start from the presumption that they are 100% honest when they say we want to be taxed, and we want a wealth tax, and the vast majority of millionaires want a wealth tax, that they actually mean it.
Do you think there is a sort of difference between their stated and revealed preferences on this? Because isn't it possible to just donate money to the Treasury if they really wanted to? Could they voluntarily pay the tax that they're campaigning for?
They absolutely could, yes. I'm generally not a fan of this argument. So sometimes people on our side of the argument say that when arguing with somebody who wants higher taxes. They would say to them, well, if you're so keen on high taxes, if you're so keen on a bigger state, why don't you just donate? Now, if you're talking about somebody in the middle of the income distribution or below, then that person could reasonably answer, well, if I pay more voluntarily, what difference does that make, right? The whole point of taxation is that it's collective. I will if you will. I will pay more if I have a guarantee that you will also pay more, but only if there is this element of reciprocity. If I have a guarantee that everyone does it, or at least a large number of people do it, otherwise you get coordination problems. That we can all agree in principle that maybe we should pay a bit more, but nobody wants to be the first mover. And so if an average taxpayer says, I support higher taxes in principle, but I won't donate to the Treasury, I don't think that's hypocritical. They can reasonably say, well, there is a coordination problem. However, if you're a multimillionaire, that's a very different situation. Firstly, because you can't say that your individual contribution makes no difference. It does. If you are in a position to make a really big payment, if you are, say, in the Times Rich list, and you decide to donate millions to HMRC, well, that means those are positions where they can fund some program, that they can hire some people. It would make a tangible difference. There, it wouldn't be true to say that an individual contribution is doesn't make a difference, is too small. And also, perhaps more importantly, they have the means to get around the coordination problem. They could say, and they have a campaign group already, they could use that as a vehicle where you could, for example, have a pledging mechanism where people sign up and say, I promise I will donate 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, whatever, if a minimum number of people within this group or other millionaires make the same pledge. So that's the way to get over the coordination problem. If you say, I will only do this if at least 1,000 other people do the same, and then the list of people who make that pledge doesn't go up to 1,000, then you're off the hook. Then you can say, I'm not going to do it on my own. We didn't mobilize enough people on this voluntary basis, therefore now I don't have to pay. But if you then have enough people, then you now have no excuse. Then you could say, okay, we have now agreed collectively amongst ourselves, we, the 1,000 millionaires, we will make this donation to HMRC. So they could absolutely use their organizational power, their campaigning power, to credibly make that pledge. Obviously, it would not be legally enforceable. Somebody saying on some web platform, I make this promise to donate, it's not going to be legally enforceable, but there would then be an element of naming and shaming. If you say in public, if you come out and say, if you make a bold promise, I will donate 1 million to HMRC, and then you in the end don't do it, well, you would be named and shamed all over Twitter. And they could just mobilize the power of social media and of their own campaign group.
Mm-hmm. Do you think going back to the sort of the difference in the argument that Zach Blansky and the Patriotic Millionaires make, do you think there's a sort of inherent tension there? Do you think they're undermining each other's argument in any way?
In a more logical world, they probably would. But what actually happens is that that section of the left, and I guess Patriotic Millionaires probably wouldn't even call themselves the left. It's just right now the wealth tax is a left-coded idea. They just go by the vibe. They would just say, well, both want a wealth tax, and everybody who wants a wealth tax is my friend. So they probably won't even notice the contradiction or the conflict. But what happens is simply that I think the Polanski method of framing the pro-wealth tax position in adversarial terms, framing this in almost class struggle terms, saying the rich, the billionaires, they're the enemy, they're to blame for everything, that's vastly more successful. And that is also the reason why he is much more of a high-profile figure than Patriotic Millionaires. So I think they have been fairly unsuccessful. Well, okay, not in the sense that people have never heard of them. I'm guessing most people listening right now will have heard of the name. They will know that there is such a group with that name, that is broadly their demand. But so I follow them on Twitter. I don't see much from them. The only time they get any interaction really is when Gary Stevenson, who is, I think he is a member, or at least he has some involvement with them. He is pretty much their only famous member. If he says something about them, that's when they get some interaction. But that's pretty much it. And he could absolutely do without them. So he's a best-selling author and YouTuber in his own right. He doesn't need the Patriotic Millionaires.
Was the Gary Stevenson case not highlight that actually the interesting nature of the Patriotic Millionaires is it's actually less we have this money and we're willing to pay it, but it's we are successful people in this economy. We know what's worked and what hasn't. We think it's broken down. Sort of Gary Stevenson message. I've benefited from betting against the economy. Is it not almost actually that the Patriotic Millionaires' unique USP is that they have got to the top of the economy and they're the ones being honest about what's gone wrong and what is needed to fix it?
Yeah, I haven't seen others from that group make that argument. It's very much Gary Stevenson's argument. He is it's a form of appeal to authority, where he would just say, well, I've bet money on my predictions. I'm rich, therefore I'm always right. And what do you know? You're an egghead economist. You've got your Econ 101 textbook, whereas I've got millions in my bank account that I made from correct predictions. The trouble is just obviously nobody can verify that. Nobody can say, oh yes, clearly he's not going to publish his accounts or his exact trades that he made. And with a breakdown where he says, I made this investment because of this reason, where you can then verify whether the way he thinks about economic life in general, whether that is really what led him to make successful investments, whether he really made predictions about economic life on the basis of his idea of what's going wrong in the economy. It's more that, so he made his money in the early 2010s, I think it was, as an interest rate trader, and that is, well, when you have interest rates being close to 0%, they can't go any lower. So there's really just two possibilities: they can stay where they are, or they can go higher. And he bet on them staying where they are, and that's the way he describes it. Okay, but this is then a binary outcome. It's like somebody betting on, say, the EU referendum, also a binary outcome. It can be Brexit, it can be Remain. You bet on one of those, and if you bet on, if you were betting on a Leave victory in 2016, you would have made money. That doesn't mean that you did that for the right reason. You could have maybe had some idea in your mind about whatever, people wanting free trade and predict a Brexit victory on those terms. Whereas if we then look at surveys among Brexit voters, among Leave voters, why did you vote the way you did? For most of them, it wasn't about free trade. So if you thought there was massive appetite for a free trade deal with Australia or India, and you were betting on a Brexit victory on that basis, well, you would have had the right outcome because the Brexit side did win, but not for that reason.
Yeah. Are you more persuaded by the Patriotic Millionaires case or the Zach Polanski case?
Neither really, because they're in a way just as bad as each other. So the main argument from the Patriotic Millionaires campaign is that since the millionaires want a wealth tax, it cannot have any negative effects. But that is not the way it works generally. You can have, okay, so if there's a tax which the people who have to pay for it, if they see it as illegitimate, then yes, of course, they would try to avoid it. But if you see a tax as perfectly legitimate, well, that doesn't mean that you're not going to react to it. You can still react to tax incentives even without making a philosophical statement about the legitimacy of the tax. So if, say, some product is more expensive now because of VAT, and I'm not buying the product, I'm standing in the supermarket in front of the shelf, I observe the price, and I think, well, that's just a little bit above my maximum willingness to pay, so I'm going to leave that product on the shelf. That is not a philosophical statement. I'm not approaching this with a Robert Nozick textbook about the legitimacy of taxation. I'm not making a philosophical statement. I'm not saying I'm leaving this product on the shelf because for philosophical reasons I want to boycott VAT. I don't want to pay it. No, it's just I have a certain willingness to pay, and if for particular products, and if the actual price is above my willingness to pay, then I'm not going to buy it, even if in principle I don't have a problem with VAT existing. So what you think about taxes in the abstract and how you react to tax incentives as you actually encounter them, those are two very different things. And we all know this from experience, and also from say conversations about with people who tell you about how they make decisions about how many, say, job offers, how many hours of work they want to do. That sometimes you say, I know someone who a left-wing lecturer who always talks about how we need a bigger state, and we should be much more like Denmark or Sweden, and how we should be willing to pay more tax. And at the same time, he does react to tax incentives quite clearly. On multiple occasions, he told me, I didn't take this offer or that offer. I didn't do it because the tax is too much. Or, maybe he doesn't quite phrase it in that way. It's more that you don't observe taxes in isolation. They just merge with something else. In case of VAT, what you see is just a price. VAT is one component of it. Okay, in this case, you probably know VAT rate is 20%, therefore you can work it out. But quite often, say, when you see a wage rate, or and you think of that in terms of the net pay that you would get for that, or in the case of, say, an investment, it would be affected by, well, if we had a wealth tax, your effective rate of return for a lot of investments would be lower. You may then observe a potential investment opportunity where you ask yourself, is this worth it? Is this worth the risk that I'm taking? The fact that I have to be patient, that I can't consume, that I have to cut back on present consumption in favor of future consumption. Is this worth it? Am I willing to forego current consumption now? Am I willing to take an investment risk if we have a wealth tax? For some of those investment opportunities, it will no longer be worth it. And the wealth tax will be a reason for it, but maybe not the only one. Taxes just merge with other market signals, and we just react to the package, the final package, the price, the wage rate, whatever. And you can still react negatively to tax incentives, even if at an abstract philosophical level you approve of the tax.
Kristian, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you too for listening. If you want to read that full piece, go to our Substack at insider.iea.org.uk to read it there. Subscribe to us there, subscribe to us here, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.